Welcome back, everyone. This is it. We have finally reached the grand series finale of our 10-part explainer, Decode Healthcare with Harshal. Look, compliance is absolutely not a solo effort. In fact, a simple breakdown in communication between clinical providers and coding teams is exactly what creates millions, literally millions of dollars in entirely preventable claim denials. So today, we are establishing the ultimate 2026 action plan to permanently unify those teams. So, let's jump right into this critical issue. Why does seemingly compliant claims just fail? I mean, the clinical work is incredibly hard, the patient care is top-notch, and yet the financial losses can be staggering. Well, the answer almost always boils down to a massive disconnect, a disconnect between the people actually performing the clinical work and the people coding that work. Over the course of this explainer series, we've covered a ton of ground. We've tackled wound classification and depth tiers, we mastered all that tricky surface area math, we defined the strict boundaries of medical necessity, and we navigated those really complex skin substitute rules. Today, we're taking all of that theoretical knowledge and operationalizing it into an airtight, totally actionable framework. Here is our quick agenda for today's capstone explainer. We'll start with the universal compliance formula, break down the provider versus coder matrix, look at a proactive query workflow, define compliance gatekeepers, and then do our grand finale wrap-up. Okay, first up, the universal compliance formula. Let's see how your foundational clinical documentation actually builds into an undeniable bulletproof claim. Medical necessity isn't just a simple checkbox you tick off. It's really like a giant multi-piece puzzle. If you're missing even one piece, the whole picture is just incomplete. And to an auditor, an incomplete picture means your claim is invalid. It honestly doesn't matter how amazing the patient's outcome was if the documentation puzzle has a massive hole right in the middle of it.
So what exactly are those puzzle pieces? It boils down to a super simple, absolutely non-negotiable 4-step formula for every single visit. Number 1, the wound. What does it look like today? Number 2, the decision. Why is treatment medically necessary right now? Number 3, the procedure. What was explicitly done, specifically detailing depth and surface area? And number 4, the outcome. How did the patient actually respond? If your documentation misses even a single one of these 4 essential components, your compliance completely collapses. It really is that straightforward.
Next up, we have the provider versus coder responsibility matrix. Let's explore how we actually execute that formula across different teams.
This 9-point matrix is basically the holy grail for a unified department. Let's look at the first few points covering clinical assessment. The provider executes this. They evaluate and log the exact length, width, depth, tissue type, and exudate, and they provide explicit rationale for today's intervention. But the coder? They don't just blindly type in numbers. They actively validate. They verify the chart is completely measurable, they check that the depth matches the CPT hierarchy, and they strictly validate that surface area math. It's a continuous system of checks and balances.
Now, as care progresses, the provider's duty is to track healing trends, adjust any stalled care plans, and carefully document things like failed conservative care before they even touch skin substitutes. At the exact same time, the coder's duty evolves into a highly analytical role. They're meticulously monitoring encounter frequencies against coverage guidelines. They're flagging high-risk plateaus in healing, and they act as a literal radar for those routine boilerplated visits that auditors absolutely love to target.
And the ultimate goal of all of this? Total audit readiness. For documentation quality, providers absolutely must eliminate that risky habit of copy-pasting their notes. You've got to craft individualized narratives. Meanwhile, the coder officially steps up as a gatekeeper, pre-auditing those claims, querying ambiguous records, and actively supporting clinical appeals way before a claim ever goes out the door.
To summarize those best practices, here are the non-negotiable daily habits you need to build. Providers, you measure every visit, explicitly name the tissue excised, and track that progress. Coders, you match that depth to the right CBT, you audit the math, and you execute proactive queries. Secure these specific habits, and I promise you, you will secure your revenue.
Let's transition from theory into the real world. Here is your proactive clinical query workflow.
Imagine a coder is reviewing a chart and spots a missing puzzle piece. Maybe the specific depth of the tissue removed just isn't there. That shouldn't result in a guess. No way. That needs to immediately trigger a proactive alert. Submitting an ambiguous chart is just a guaranteed path to a denial.
The workflow has to stop right there, and the query process must begin immediately.
So, how do we query effectively? Communication is everything here. Check out this phrasing. Dr. Smith, the clinical note indicates debridement but lacks the deepest tissue layer removed. Could you clarify to ensure accurate CPT assignment? This is the perfect way for a coder to constructively query a clinician. It's respectful, it's precise, and most importantly, it highlights a shared goal. It helps you achieve an audit-proof record without making the provider feel like they're being policed.
Which brings us to a major paradigm shift: coders as compliance gatekeepers.
In the modern revenue cycle, your coding teams are no longer just data entry specialists blindly pulling numbers from a drop-down menu. They're your frontline compliance gatekeepers. This is the 2026 evolution of the coding professional. Their actual job is to proactively validate clinical narratives, ensure medical necessity is flawlessly proven on paper, and completely prevent denials before claims are even generated.
By totally embracing this paradigm shift, you're uniting the provider's deep clinical expertise with the coder's strict regulatory vigilance. It creates a really powerful symbiotic partnership. This is not an adversarial relationship. It is a perfectly unified workflow that neutralizes audit risks from the inside out.
All right, as we close out this incredible 10-part journey together, let's distill everything down to the absolute essentials.
If you take nothing else away from this series, remember these 5 core golden commandments. Number 1, always prove medical necessity for today's specific visit. Number 2, remember that depth ultimately dictates the CPT code set. Number 3, accurate surface area math is completely non-negotiable. Number 4, stop copy-pasting and start documenting individualized healing for every single patient. And number 5, embrace that provider-coder collaboration workflow we just went over. If your clinicians and revenue cycle leaders memorize and execute these 5 commandments, you will master wound care compliance for sure. I want to leave you with one final challenge as you take this framework back to your organizations tomorrow morning. Will your team continue to operate in risky, isolated silos, just waiting for a random audit to wipe out your hard-earned revenue? Or will you unite your clinical and coding forces to actively defend your clinical excellence? The choice is entirely up to you. Thank you so much for joining me on this masterclass journey. It has been an absolute pleasure to decode healthcare with all of you. Until next time, stay curious and keep learning.